Can hear you.
Excellent, thank you. Excellent, fantastic. So I'm going to share my slide now, and we'll start the session immediately because I would like us to have sufficient time for questions. And I think somehow this slide has managed to go to 17. Yeah, there we are. So we're looking at board evaluation today, and we want to be able to understand the fundamental, the dynamics, and the right application of board evaluation in order to be able to go ahead and deploy board evaluation in as part of our offerings as individual consultants, exam members, and of course as professionals. Okay, so I beg your pardon, 1 minute, please. We're having a bit of. This is our outline. I'm not going to do on the outline since we're going to discuss the content. I'll just go quickly to this quote. And this quote is of great interest to me because one part of it is something we're all very familiar with. And we say a governance is a journey and not a destination. I think we're all very familiar with that statement. Governance is a journey. It's not a destination. Well, this is a quote by Barry S. Bader. Now, he said, great governance is a journey, not a destination. Past performance is, as the saying goes, no guarantee of future success. The board that becomes self-satisfied is a board that may underperform its potential and the organization's needs. So, if our board, or if any board for that matter, is not to underperform its full potential and meeting the organization's needs, then it means that that board must not become self-satisfied. It means that we must continue to reinvent ourselves as board members, and therefore as consultants, as professionals, as corporate secretaries. We have to support our boards. We have to support boards within our sphere of influence in going beyond where they are to getting better results. This is part of the reason why board evaluation is necessary, because if we don't know where we are at, then it's going to be difficult to know whether we're underperforming or whether we're doing well. So evaluation helps us to know whether we're doing well or not. So talking about doing well speaks to effectiveness. If you recall, and I hope we do recall, because this principle is Principle 1 of Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance, 2018. That is our present National Code of Corporate Governance, and I expect everyone in this room to be familiar with this code inside out. And Principle 1 is the very first principle. So even if you're not familiar with the entire code, you should be very familiar with Principle 1. Principle 1 talks about the effectiveness, the issue of effectiveness. So what does the principle say? A successful company is headed by an effective board. And I always say, when I deliver papers on this subject of board and board effectiveness, and in fact on success of companies and sustainability of companies, that this principle does not say a successful company is headed by a board. Please take note that it says a successful company is headed by an effective board, which is responsible for providing entrepreneurial and strategic leadership as well as promoting ethical culture and responsible corporate citizenship. That board is a link between stakeholders and the company, and it exercises oversight and control, which ensures that it acts in the best interest of the shareholders and other stakeholders, while at the same time sustaining the prosperity of the company. This principle is so all-encompassing, and it brings out the key things that as board evaluators, we should be looking out for during the course of evaluation. Because you may ask yourself, so I want to go and conduct evaluation, and this is a certification program for those who want to conduct evaluation. What do I look for? Where do I start? How do I know whether this board is successful, is doing the right thing or not? Principle 1 right there sets the parameters for you in terms of where you should begin to look. What are the things we need to look for and all that? As we go into this presentation, we're going to break this down a bit more. We're going to look at the who, the what, the why, the where, and so on and so forth, and the how, if you like, of board evaluation. So let's continue for now. So if we're going to evaluate boards very well, then we must start by understanding what does it mean to be an effective board. Remember that what we just read now in principle 1 speaks about who heads a successful company, and underlining that word effect, or that expression or phrase, effective board. An effective board. Okay, so if it's an effective board, what then does it mean for a board to be effective? What are the 6 pillars of board effectiveness? Talking about the 6 pillars of board effectiveness, we must start with pillar 1, which is the composition of the board itself. The board composition also speaks to the capabilities of the directors. Of course, the board is composed of directors, and then we would say that we would have the chairman, we would have the non-executive directors. Hopefully, and especially importantly now, even with the newcomer and other provisions of other codes, especially our own Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance, we're expected to have independent non-executive directors. Of course, we would have executive directors. Oftentimes, it's just one executive director who is the CEO as well. But of course, there's no hard and fast rule. It really depends on the company, the size of the company, and the type of business the company is into, and so on. So irrespective of what, and if you look at our code, you will find that the code doesn't dictate to you how the board should be composed. The code is an apply and explain code. So you apply the principle of having various types of directors, the non-execs, the independent non-execs, the executive directors, the chair himself, and of course, having the company secretary supporting the board and all that. You apply that and you explain how you applied it. So how one company would apply it would definitely be different from how another applies it. But it is one of the key pillars, in fact, the first pillar of board effectiveness. Aside from the composition, it's not just about having person sitting in the room saying, I'm an NED, I'm an INED, I'm an ED. It is really about their capacity, their capabilities as well. So that speaks to the skills mix in the room as well. So that composition, beyond the types of directors, is also the skills mix of the directors. Who are the directors? What their areas of specialization, if you like, okay, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, we talk about the issue of having gender mix, diversity in the board, okay, and so many other things. Then we go and talk about directors' duties. The duties and the responsibilities. How well do directors understand their duties, and what are the duties and responsibilities of the board? Of course, this is a legal issue, and it's important that the board is well trained and understands its duties and responsibilities as a collective, as a board, and also that individual directors also understand their duties and responsibilities as individual directors. As a matter of fact, these duties and responsibilities also give rise to liabilities. So it's very important that these things are well understood by directors and the board as a collective. Then we go on to the structure of the board, the processes the board has put in place, and the protocols that the board uses for doing its business. So you will talk about things like having board committees. We'll talk about things like how these committees work. Do they have charters? Do they have, does the board itself have a board charter? What are the protocols? How does the board, does the chairman, what is the quorum even for meetings and so on and so forth? So the processes, the structure, the processes, the protocols, these are all things that will be evaluated, because these are the things that help you determine as a professional board evaluator whether the board is actually effective or not. These are all pillars of board effectiveness. Then we go on to the role of the board. The board has roles, various roles, and these roles have been broken down. That's on the fourth pillar. These roles have been broken down into 5 sub-pillars, if you like. So we all know that the board is responsible for strategy development. So how does the board take its role in strategy development? We know that the board is responsible for performance management. How does the board handle its role in performance management? Of course, for the to do that, clearly there have to be proper targets set, and not at the end of the year the board is just saying, okay, have we done well, have we not done well? How can you assess whether you've done well or not done well if there was no clear target set in the first instance? Then, of course, there's risk management. The board is responsible for risk management. How well does the board take on this responsibility for risk management, and what has the board done in that regard? Has the risk appetite been determined by the board? Has the board set parameters for the kind of risks the company is willing to go into, and if not, and how far the company is willing to go, and where the parameters or where the brakes must be put so that we don't exceed the level of risk we want to engage in. Of course, there's capital markets. The board is responsible for capital markets. Well, the extent of the involvement in capital markets obviously would depend on the kind of organization it is. Okay, then there's also senior management evaluation and development. Yes, the board is also responsible for senior management evaluation and development. And it's very important that the board is aware of how the top management people are performing. And there's interface between the board and them, and not just with the CEO alone. Okay. Otherwise, the board will be a board that is having to funnel its thinking and its views through one individual, and that would make the board quite ineffective. So how well the board does plays all these roles is very, very critical in determining the board's effectiveness. The 5th pillar of board effectiveness is, of course, effective board dynamics. This has to do with interactions between the board members, especially at meetings, how the discussions go, how the contributions are made, issues of even disagreements on the board, dissent, how the chairman takes on dissent, and how he encourages dissent, how different viewpoints are expressed, how conflicts are managed. All these dynamics are very critical to the success of any board. So how the board handles that is another aspect of what we evaluate in board evaluation. Then finally is board evaluation and renewal. How does this particular board we're evaluating consider, what is its view on board evaluation and renewal? And to be honest with you, you don't find out how a board takes board evaluation and renewal merely by asking the question. You can ask the question, but I can tell you that sometimes people say, oh, board evaluation, we believe so strongly in board evaluation and so on. But then a review of the documents, of the board minutes, of different things in the organization would tell you whether they're just paying lip service to board evaluation and renewal, which is the sixth pillar, a very important pillar of board effectiveness, or they really truly believe in it. Okay. If you look at also another thing that we can look at to determine that is even previous board evaluation, assuming they have held board evaluations, because some organizations, invite consultants to come and do board evaluation and just to check the box and say, yes, we too, we did board evaluation, and to report it in their annual report or even on their website. Oh, we had a board evaluation. What has the board implemented in the board evaluation report? So looking at the report and looking at the board conversations, committee conversations, especially governance committee conversations, and other conversations around the board flowing from that board evaluation also helps to determine how well the board, or how effective the board is, and how seriously it takes on this pillar of effectiveness. There are features as well that you look out for in terms of the pillars of board effectiveness. So you find things like the strength of the chairman's leadership. How well does the chairman lead the board? Now, some chairmen make the mistake of thinking that overruling the board is their way of demonstrating their strength. No, that is not what we're saying. We're not saying the chair should be the only one who speaks at the meetings, or he should overrule everybody, and should only be the chairman's view that is upheld in the discussions. Not at all. Quite on the contrary, as a matter of fact. However, the strength of the chairman's leadership is actually demonstrated in how he's able to handle the board dynamics. So where board members are disagreeing amongst themselves, or there are various, the meeting wants to get rowdy or something, how does the chairman step up and handle those things and bring the board back under control? Don't forget that the chairman is what we call first among equals. So there's supposed to be some element of respect because he's usually chosen by the board members themselves as someone they respect and are willing to follow his leadership. So that respect and that leadership will stand him in good stead to actually lead the board. So you can see from various discussions, maybe the one-on-one interviews, different things, how well the chairman's leadership is going. And this is part of the aspects of that we evaluate in board evaluation. Then there's also the quality of the non-executive and executive interface or partnership, if you like. And of course, in this we include the INETs as well. And of course, for those who are not familiar with that expression, INETs, I'm talking about the independent non-executives, executive directors as well. So how they partner together, because don't forget, the board has a common goal. The approach of the non-executive directors may be different from that of the executive directors. The approach of the independent non-executive directors may be different from those of the other directors in the room. Even the chairman's approach might be different from that of other people. Everyone has their respective roles, whether they sit on a particular committee and whether in that context of their role in that committee. Everywhere anyone is in the board, they all are playing different roles at any point in time. So the way they go about it will be different. However, the collective goal should be seen through it all, that we're all working towards the same goal of the success of the company, the same goal of realizing the purpose, the objects of this company. And therefore, that partnership, there should be a partnership spirit. You bring what you have, I bring what I have, and at the end of the day, it all works together as a synergy towards achieving the good results that we want. Then for this to work, there has to be best-in-class information and process architecture. First of all, the information flow from the executives to the non-executives, because the non-executives are not there on a day-to-day basis. The executives are the ones who are there on a day-to-day basis. So there has to be proper information flow that allows the non-executives to have the right quality of information to make decisions or make informed contributions from. and not just the right type or the right quality, but also it has to be timely and sufficiently proactive. It shouldn't be something that the board members are getting information a few hours to the board meeting, or a few or a day to the board meeting. As a matter of fact, this is where the process architecture comes in. The board needs to put in place how it wants that information to come. How, in terms of the quality of the information, the type of the information, the format of the information, the timelines relating to the information, and put the process architecture in place. For example, you'll find that the usual thing in a good organization where there's a strong and influential company secretary is that all the information, perhaps except that of the CEO, will be channeled through the company secretary to the board. So the company secretary ensures that the board receives that information in the form and in the format and within the timelines and everything that the board has set, because the secretary is there as the one that documents the board decisions in this regard. So he or she knows what the board wants to see in terms of the information that comes to the board, in terms of how that information comes to the board, in terms of the format in which that information comes to the board, so as to make it useful for board members and for committee members, as the case may be. Then, of course, there's the issue of competence of the directors, but it's not just their competence, but also their character. So you find that in many times when there has been poor governance, it has been as a result of groupthink on the board. And I can tell you that a competence of board members, alone is not enough, because oftentimes before people are appointed to a board, they're usually very competent people. They're usually people who have established themselves, who have proven that they have something to offer in terms of elsewhere where they've been. But character means that they have the courage, they have the presence of mind, they have the ability to speak up and to disagree or to dissent, as the case may be, if need be, where things are going the way that they should not be going. That is very critical for the success of any organization. If we all just agree to whatever is said, then it's a board that has groupthink, and it's a very dangerous board. For lack of time, I may not be able to go into more details in terms of that particular thing, because we have had actually instances even in the Nigerian banking environment where a particular bank was saved from the Sanusi, what should we call that Sanusi action, that swept away many boards in 2009. A particular bank that would have suffered the same fate was actually saved from it because just one director in the boardroom had said no to a particular credit. He said everyone could not convince him. And again, kudos must also go to the board chair, who said if we are unable to convince our colleague that because of the extent, it was a huge credit, and he wanted the board to have a unanimous decision on that credit. And because one director said no, and the chairman said, if we are unable to convince our colleague that this is the way to go, then let's all sleep on it. Let's not go this route yet. Let's go back, sleep on it, and review it at a subsequent date. Subsequently, when the hurricane swept away so many of the directors of different other banks, it came to the fore that that particular creditor, I beg your pardon, that particular debtor was one that featured in about 3 banks, and in terms of the loans that were non-performing in those institutions, and by reason of which their names featured in the institutions that the CBN took action against. So which means that this particular bank would have suffered the same fate if they had gone ahead to approve that loan and disburse those funds, because this was a terrible debtor who was not interested in repaying his debts. And unfortunately, there wasn't enough information flow amongst the banks to share information one with the other, so that they would all know who is a good creditor, is a good debtor, and who is not. So competence and character. That director, I can tell you that there was a lot of pressure on him from other directors to let that credit go. And he stood his ground because he strongly believed that this was not a good debtor for the bank to have. And at the end of the day, they were all celebrating his character, and his behavior in standing his ground through that issue. Sometimes groupthink actually creates problems, because the CEO, every director is appointed to a board, is nominated by one director or the other, is introduced by somebody in that board. Even though the shareholders may eventually approve the directors, it is the directors themselves that choose those that will join them under our law and under the protocols that we have in Nigeria. So you can imagine some directors feeling that, after I have brought you in, you are now acting as if you can do anything. They expect other directors who they brought in or who they nominated to go in the direction of yes for something that is coming from them. But that should not always be the case. What should be the case is that a director has that responsibility if he understands his duties and responsibilities. Again, speaking to that issue of duties and responsibilities of directors, they should take the position of what is in the best interest of the company. That is who they owe their loyalty to, the company, and not to the individuals or whoever may have influenced their coming to the board, or even whoever may be their friend on the board. Then there's the board team dynamics. And speaking of the issue of competence and character and behavior of directors, these influence the board team dynamics, how the board relates. If it is even the chairman, sometimes it's also the chairman who is, being overbearing and all that in the board meeting. How a director who has the character and the right attitude can, stand up to the chairman and say, Chair, we don't think this is right. Obviously, it will have to be in a very respectful manner and in a way that does not create offense with the chairman, or offense for even other directors who may feel the way you've spoken to our chair is not right. But the point is that it's important in the team dynamics that mutual respect is upheld, but at the same time, people have and feel that their responsibility to the company must come first, and therefore they uphold their dissent and they state their dissent as the case may be, and stand their ground if there's a need to do that. And then where that happens, the role of the chairman in encouraging dissent, the role of the chairman in dynamics is very, very key. The chairman must allow board members to express themselves. I've seen chairmen who do not even allow board members to speak. Once the chairman, a subject matter is brought up for discussion, of course, there's usually an agenda. The chairman has a way of stating what his preference would be in terms of how the conversation should go. And just by doing that, he discourages other board members from speaking their mind. But there's still some board members, even in that situation, that would still speak their mind. But you can imagine how that would then flow. Then, of course, speaking of features of board effectiveness, again, is performance evaluation culture. There must be a culture, not just a one-off. It's not that we have a board evaluation now and the next one is in 5 years' time, but that we have a culture of board evaluation, because we want to evaluate ourselves, be sure what we're doing and how well we're doing. And remembering that first quotation about being able to assess how well we're doing, and thereafter to see what areas we need to improve upon and what areas we can continue in the way we're being able to find, what areas we should drop altogether. Okay. And that has to be a culture. And a strong and influential company secretary is very key to driving that culture in the organization. Very, very key. I deliberately spent time to explain these things because it's important to know what we are evaluating. So, what is board evaluation itself? Is actually a process for assessment of effectiveness. So you can see that that's why we're taking the trouble to look at what amounts to effectiveness. If we don't have all these features we've been discussing, then we don't have effectiveness. So when we now want to go into the process of assessing effectiveness, that tells us that we have to look at those pillars. We have to look at those features and determine how effective a particular board is. This gives any board evaluator a clear direction in terms of where I'm going, what I need to be looking out for, and what amounts to effectiveness. So it's a process for assessment of effectiveness. That's what board evaluation is all about. It's also has been identified and acclaimed as a catalyst for good corporate governance. So any organization that believes or lends its name to good practice of corporate governance must have board evaluation as one of its corporate cultures. Then it helps. What does it do? It reviews the board's achievements and how the achievements have been attained. So sometimes board members are afraid of board evaluation because they think is going to catch them where they're going wrong. But board evaluation is not just about finding out what is going wrong. It is also, and very importantly, finding out what the board has been doing right. Because when a board is conscious of what it's doing right, then it will know how to continue to be effective. So it involves reviewing the board's achievement, but beyond reviewing the achievement itself, but it also involves determining how those achievements were attained. Obviously, it involves the board, because if we're talking about board evaluation, it must involve the board. It involves the board, but beyond the board, it also involves its committees, it involves its processes, it involves its structures. It also includes assessment of the chairman and the individual board members. It is a board responsibility, and it can be done internally or externally. So internally is when sometimes the chairman will evaluate other board members. Sometimes the board will do a self-evaluation whereby every director will evaluate every other director, and even evaluate the board itself. Sometimes it also involves the company secretary evaluating the board members, but it can also be done externally, which most codes of corporate governance have said that even if you want to do internal evaluations, at least once in every 3 years, you must conduct an external board evaluation in order to actually have an evaluation that is objective, that is independent, that tells you how you are, exactly how you are, and what works and what doesn't work. So it evaluates the entire governance spectrum, okay, and it's about an intentional governance spectrum. So you look at things like leadership succession, how the board is planning its leadership succession. Oftentimes, the board plans for CEO succession, but doesn't plan for chairman succession, doesn't plan for a committee chair succession, doesn't plan for even board succession in terms of the directors that are on the board. Doesn't create room to change of bringing new ideas, new thoughts into the boardroom, new blood and all that, injecting new blood into the boardroom. So the governance spectrum involves the evaluation and performance, as we've talked about, education and development. So this is one of the areas of the company secretary's responsibility. Of course, even the code says that once new directors are appointed, they must be inducted. But beyond the induction of new directors, there's also the issue of continuous education for the existing board members. These are all things that need to be evaluated in terms of when you are doing the evaluation. Then you need to look at the board culture. What is the culture on the board? And also whether that culture, whether the structure that the board has put in place, supports the culture or supports the culture the board says it wants to have. Sometimes people can speak to a culture that they want to have, but in actual fact, the culture on ground is totally different. And as it's said in the management, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So even if you're strategizing and saying this is a culture we want to have, or this is what we want to achieve in terms of performance and so on, if you don't have the right culture and the right structure to drive the right culture, then it's not likely that you'll achieve those. And to speak again back to the issue of effectiveness of the board, then of course there's board recruitment, okay, the process that the board goes through in injecting new blood into the board, and then of course, which also is related to succession planning. So all these things is about performance. All these parameters will speak to the performance of the board. And I like this quote again by Sir Brian Nicholson, who was the chair of the FRC. He said, board evaluation is critical to improve board effectiveness. So if we want to improve board effectiveness, we must evaluate the board. Evaluating the board is critical for improving of board effectiveness. But if weaknesses are not known, performance cannot be improved upon. So board evaluation will therefore bring out the strengths and the weaknesses of the board so that its performance can be improved upon. So when we know our weaknesses and we know our strengths, then we'll be able to downplay the weaknesses by improving in the areas where we're weak, and also strengthen the strengths by even also improving on the areas where we're strong, such that we can do much better. These are things that help you as a board evaluator convince your clients or convince your potential client about the importance of board evaluation. Sometimes people want to know why. Why do we even need to do board evaluation? If you, the evaluator, do not know why board evaluation should be done, then you are going to have difficulty in convincing a client to even do the board evaluation. Now, Principle 14 of our own Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance speaks to the issue of board evaluation. It says that an annual board evaluation assesses how each director, the committees of the board, and the board itself are committed to their roles, how they work together. Remember board dynamics? How they work together and continue to contribute effectively to the achievement of the company's objectives. So first of all, the board must recognize what the objectives are. Does the board even know what the objectives of the company are? Then if the board knows that, then the board must work towards achieving those company objectives. Now, the evaluation helps to assess how the board as a whole, as a unit, individual directors, and the board committees all of them work together in order to achieve these objectives of the company. Of course, by the time you go through the various recommended practices under the principle, you will also see some of the key parameters in terms of how this can be accomplished. But I thought it was very important to bring your attention to this principle. So it's even one of the principles that the board needs to apply and explain. So if you say you are doing it internally, you will explain how you have applied this principle and how it has worked. But I know that our code says that at least once in 3 years, it must be done by external faculty. So if we're going to be either the external faculty that do it, or we're going to work from the perspective, maybe we'll have some company secretaries here, we're going to work from the perspective of what's it called, from the perspective of being internal persons supporting the internal process. That is also a key issue that the board we must determine. But just for us to know that it is a principle in our code, and everyone needs to apply it and explain how they've applied it. So let's go on to the next. Board evaluation in corporate governance. I believe that's my next slide. So it contributes, the board evaluation process itself contributes to performance improvement. Remember the quote by Brian Nicholson, the former FRC chair, that it's critical for board improvement, for performance improvement by the board. Now, this board evaluation, it actually contributes to performance improvement at 3 levels. It contributes at the organizational level, which is the company as a whole. Okay, because if you have a good board that knows what it's doing, it will lead the company aright, and the company as a whole will feel the impact of how well the board is doing. It contributes to the board itself, how well the board does its work, how effective the board is. It also contributes to individual directors, how it helps them to improve their role as individual directors and board members, not just in the particular company. I can tell you from personal experience, because I've been involved in doing quite a number of board evaluations myself. And you find that individual directors are able to take the learnings from a particular board evaluation to go and improve even the way they work as director in another company. So it helps the director as an individual to become a far better resource person, a far better resource for the board, for the company, for himself, okay, and for the economy as a whole. Then it's a key feature of progressive boards. I think I may have mentioned this before, but it's very important because one of the key features of progressive boards is that they take board evaluation very, very seriously. They consider it a must to have board evaluation. Now, it is a global best practice that ensures board effectiveness, and the process itself involves rigorous testing. It involves formal assessment. You see, board evaluation is not done informally. It's not an informal process at all. It's not, a process you just do shabbily. Okay, company secretary, come in, come and ask us a few questions. Then when we finish, we say we have done board evaluation. Not at all. But the evaluation is a very, very rigorous process. Obviously, you can determine how rigorous you want a particular exercise to be, but it has to be clearly documented. It's something that you'll be able to bring out and show that it has been done, and this is at the parameters we identified that we decided to use for this year's assessment. Okay, and these are the outcomes. So there's a report, there has to be an outcome, there has to be a report at the end of the day, there has to be involvement, there are various things that are involved. It's conducted annually. It's not something that you conduct, I just feel like board evaluation. Let's do board evaluation now. Then we'll now do it this year. Then 3 years from now, say, hey, that board evaluation we did that time was nice, so maybe we should do another one. No. Board evaluation is something that is done periodically, and the periodic timelines is annually, because boards are supposed to report on their performance on an annual basis, even to shareholders. Everything about running a company is reported annually. Board evaluation is not left out. It is done annually because it helps you then to see. In fact, you can actually track your performance as a board, or a board can track its performance from 1 year to the next to see those things that have been identified in the last year's board evaluation. This year's board evaluation, had we dealt with them? Did we improve in the areas that board evaluator identified, and so on and so forth? So it's a very deliberate process. Effectiveness of it tracks effectiveness of the board. Okay, and even the board composition. We talked about one of the key pillars. In fact, number one pillar of board effectiveness is board composition. Okay, so it tracks the effectiveness of the composition of the board. It tracks the effectiveness of the board's dynamics. It tracks the effectiveness of the board's operations and structure. It tracks the effectiveness of virtually everything on the board, the board culture, the corporate culture, and so on and so forth. It relates to the company, its business environment, and its objectives. So it's not about going to check what a director is doing in his house. No, it's not about going to check whether the chairman is on good terms with his neighbors. No, it relates to the company. It's about the business environment and its objectives. Having said that, I know also that if the chairman or a director is traveling in his vehicle or by air, and he gets to the airport and has a loud disagreement with somebody who is not related to the company, it can come back and haunt the company. I'm not downplaying that fact. So it also helps because it will not be meeting the objectives of the company. Because the company, one of the principles of corporate governance is reputation and reputational risk. So the reputation of the company is also very key. So, however, I'm just saying that those are not things that the board evaluation is seeking to track per se. Okay. Of course, like I mentioned, and the corporate governance codes have stated that at least once in 3 years, you should have an external faculty handle your board evaluation or the board evaluation. Now, there are 3 different types of board evaluation I have sought to bring out here, or rather, actually there are 6 types, but I'm just comparing them in 3 categories. Okay, each one has its advantages and disadvantages. So we've talked extensively about internal or external evaluation. First of all, one of the key disadvantages of internal is that it lacks objectivity. Okay, so if it's been conducted by the chairman or even chair of governance committee, you may like some they may like one director or some directors more than others. Of course, being human, who we like or who we don't like can influence the outcomes that we present in a particular matter. Whereas an external body, is more likely to be objective, to bring in that professionalism, is doing it as a professional assignment, brings in that professionalism, and it's very deliberate. In fact, the process will even be taken more seriously when it's done by an external body. No little wonder the codes also say that even if you don't do it annually because of the cost, having external parties do it for you. If you are mindful of costs, at the very least, once in 3 years, you need to spend that money and bring external parties to come and do it for you, so that you have that objective exercise that is very professionally done and that gives confidence, and that's on which you can actually leverage to improve effectiveness. Then there's full or partial board evaluation. So you can do evaluation that relates to certain aspects and leave other aspects out. So for example, you could do a board evaluation that is just about the board and its committees. You may not necessarily do like a peer review process into it. A peer review process is a bit more detailed and so on. And some people even do only the peer review, they don't do the collective one and all that. So these are options. But the key thing is actually to determine beforehand what you want to achieve, what the process wants to achieve. Incidentally, the code doesn't dictate to you on which to do or which not to do. Don't forget it's an apply and explain code. So whatever decision the board makes in terms of which one it wants to do or what approach it wants to adopt, the key thing is to be ready to explain. It must be well thought out, must be well thought through, and say, okay, this is a principle we have implemented. This principle, we've applied it, and this is how we've applied it, and this is how we're getting the expected outcomes. The expected outcomes are coming because this year we said that we'll go this route. Okay. Then there's, of course, the individual or team. So sometimes, again, this has to do also sometimes with looking at individual board members. You see, one thing about the board evaluation is that many directors are scared of board evaluation, and usually it's because they are afraid that the evaluation would throw them up in their personal capacity, in terms of their personal contributions to the board, that they are not contributing as much as they should, or as much as expected, as much as they could. And so they kind of are weary of having a board evaluation done. So when the evaluation is going to be of the board as a team, they tend to be a bit more open to letting that evaluation happen. And these are some of the advantages and disadvantages of whichever way you choose to go. However, at the end of the day, they are all options. And again, which approach you adopt would also depend to an extent on how much time, because it's actually also a very detailed process, and time is often needed to, if you're going to do a full one that involves the entire team. Time is needed to achieve that. Oh dear. So Gigi, please confirm to me that you are still hearing me.
Yes, I'm following, ma'am. Participants, please confirm that you are still.
Yes, we
can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Just 1 minute, please. My just 1 minute, please. Back to my slide. Okay. Okay. So, yeah, I've seen what I'm looking for. So, remember that when we were talking about this board evaluation, I talked about one of the things that we look at being not just whether the board occasionally does board evaluation, but actually whether the board has a culture of board performance evaluation. Culture means that, okay, we do it annually, and annually without fail, we do it. Okay, and this culture also brings about results. An organization that does its board evaluation annually without fail, there's going to be clear indications, and especially if they take it seriously, not just that they do it and check the box and put it in the drawer or put it, but they actually work with the outcomes of those board evaluations. They take on the short-term deliverables from the consultant. They implement them. They implement the medium-term ones. Then on the longer term, they implement the long-term ones. What you're going to find is that if the board, for example, started out in year one as an average board, is going to move to an effective board, and it's going to move from an effective board into a high-performing board. And when the board has achieved being a high-performing board, it is then going to find that from year on year, it's going to be able to add into its performance, maybe have an extra 10% improvement this year, and an extra 15% improvement the next year, an extra 20% improvement the following year, and so on and so forth. It's just going to keep improving in terms of its performance as a board. Now, there are key to-dos for us as board evaluators. There's some key things that are very important in terms of whether that board evaluation itself is going to be successful. The first one is what I call pre-evaluation engagement. In fact, we have done, Dr. Nosiki and I have been involved in board evaluations for PLCs, for multinational entities, different board evaluations, and the results are usually different. Even the acceptability of the results are also different. One of the key success factors that we've been able to take away is the pre-evaluation engagement. So you have like a presentation to the board as a whole, to board members, and you tell them this what to expect and what is expected from them. You show them how you want to go about it, what you plan to evaluate. Just generally take them through what is intended. Yes, they are the ones calling you to come and do evaluation. So there may be the assumption that, they believe in evaluation, they know about evaluation, but it would be a very dangerous assumption. You let them ask their questions, let their minds be at rest, help them to understand that nobody is about to be fired from the board, that this is just to help us improve our performance and our effectiveness, and even tell them about some of the tools you would deploy. For example, the questionnaires, how to go about answering the questionnaires, what each answer means. Because usually in the questionnaire system, you may choose to put a grid, of 1 to 5 or 1 to 4, depending on there's no hard and fast rule. Some even do 1 to 3, some do 1 to 7. Some have said that 1 to 7 is the best grid because it gives the opportunity to really see those who have done well and different from those who haven't, and so on and so forth. So there's no hard and fast rule. But the truth is that whichever one or whatever you are doing, this pre-evaluation engagement gives you the opportunity to explain to the board and to carry the board along. Another key factor, success factor, is agreeing the scope of the board evaluation. Usually the scope of the board evaluation may be agreed with the board, depending on how involved the board is, or it may be agreed with the governance committee if the governance committee has been given the mandate to run the board evaluation process. Sometimes it's agreed with the board secretary and the CEO, and so on and so forth. Really, every company is different from every other company. So those who have certain responsibilities in the different companies may differ. But the key is in having an insider, or it may even be the evaluation, because usually you would set up like a board evaluation team, a team that is made up of your own people, your own team members, and the client's team members. So it might even be that team but it's important that there's somebody at top level who has access to the board, who is able to defend the scope beyond yourselves as the evaluators, to say, yes, this is why, because they are the insiders, they know what the issues are, why the board is trying to get you to come in and do this evaluation. Okay, so it's important that they speak to the need and demonstrate that need is being met by the agreed scope. Then you set the methodology. Setting the methodology for the evaluation is also very important. But it's not enough to set the methodology, you must also communicate it. Okay? Usually it will probably be in your proposal document or in the agreement that will be signed with the client or whatever. There has to be somewhere the methodology that you've chosen to adopt is documented, or at the very least, you can also do it in the pre-evaluation engagement. Have a presentation that has slides that say this is the methodology we're going to adopt, so that tomorrow somebody's not going to say, you picked on them. The methodology you adopted was intended to bring them out in poor light. You'd be amazed what human beings do or say in a board evaluation situation, because everybody is kind of, a lot of people are sensitive. People don't like to be assessed. Oh, it's okay for CEO to be assessed. Everybody likes to bash the CEO. When it comes to the board being assessed and the possibility that the board might be found wanting or individual directors may be found wanting, it's a different kettle of fish. So you have to protect yourself as a professional. Make sure that you are very transparent about the process from day one. Include clear criteria and KPIs as well. And you yourself now ensure you are independent. Okay? You must be very, very professional. Professionalism does not take on a more serious meaning than it does when it comes to a board evaluation. Don't forget that we're talking about the governance body of an entity. You must be seen, you must not only be professional, you must be seen to be professional. I must be very independent. And being independent means that sometimes you will say things to them that they were hoping you wouldn't say. But because you are the professional, they will take it. Truth be told, they will take it, but they will only take it if they see you as being consistent in that independence. Not when it is the chairman, you downplay his own. Then when you're talking about somebody else, you now break it up and see that person is the. In fact, every board member, you will discover that on most boards, there are different kinds of cliques. And people have people who support them, and people have those who are against them, and so on. You don't want to go and join their politics. You don't even know the head or tail of what the politics is. And you may find yourself by mistake, maybe because of the way you made your presentation, looking as if you are supporting one group or the other. And it's very important to be careful about this, because sometimes, because of the engagement with the board secretary or the company secretary, the likelihood is that the company secretary will inadvertently communicate to you the people who, in the company secretary's view, are the troublemakers. And if you're not careful, you may go away with that feeling those people are the troublemakers, and you'll be looking out for them subconsciously. Be very careful. Be independent, be confidential, and be professional. Usually the organization would have asked you to sign a confidentiality agreement or a non-disclosure agreement. And even if they didn't, it's important for you to suggest it to them, so as to also give them that confidence that, you are mindful of the need to be very professional and to protect them from their competition, or even to protect them, the information you're going to get out of them from being exposed to third parties. Then be aware. It's very important to be aware of the conflicts of interest or the vested interest going on. Here again, the company secretary be very useful tool, but I can tell you that if you adopt one of the methodologies that we normally recommend, which is one-on-one interviews, you will still get to know. But it's important that you put everything in the box where it belongs and keep yourself detached from the various interests that you will find, because every company and every board is a mix of human beings. There are always all kinds of interests involved. Don't let them accuse you of taking sides with anybody against anybody else. Deploy qualified personnel who have boardroom practice experience to handle the assignment of EB. I do not, I don't personally like the attitude, or the approach of deploying some analysts to go and interview board members and be checking boxes. It does not give a true picture of what is actually happening. And when I say boardroom personnel, it don't have to be directors. Company secretaries are boardroom personnel. People who have had company secretarial experience, people who have had director experience, even people who have been assistant company secretaries, would have had some boardroom practice experience. It's not ideal for them to be reading. You find a situation people are analyzing the minutes of a board, and they are giving it very operational interpretation. Board documents are not operational in nature. Board discussions are not operational in nature. At least it shouldn't be. When board members sit and they are discussing what the management is doing, even if they are looking at the operations of management, they are looking at it more strategically than operationally. They are less interested in small things like what example can I give you now? How a particular tractor is even a big thing. So depending on the kind of organization, it might be of interest to a board, to the board. But on who is supplying some stationery, or how the supply of stationery is not giving the security men some attention, or whatever. The board is not interested in this kind of thing. The board is, or at least should be, much more strategic in terms of, okay, so the stationary truck drove into the premises. What risk factors arose as a result? Did the driver go through like if it's some multinational organizations, they have a kind of training you have to go through before you enter their premises, because of various things that are happening in their premises, and the fact that accidents could happen that have bigger risk implications, and so on and so forth. The board will probably be more interested in terms of the risk factors that would arise or that could have arisen because of the action by the stationary supplier's driver, than in whether the man greeted the security men or not. I mean, those are irrelevant things as far as the board is concerned. Whereas somebody who is an analyst looking at things operationally may think that the lack of greeting is a much more serious thing. That at least if the man had greeted, he would have shown that he's a nice man, that he's a respectful man. So, but at that level may not be very, very significant. What about listening? Listening. In fact, listen. I would have said listen. Especially during the interviews. And sometimes by the time you're doing interviews, you may have read some of the materials. You may have begun to form some views. But the interviews would either confirm those views as being accurate or show you that you need to go in a different direction. But if you have made up your mind, you will not hear what the other party is saying. Please hear what they are saying, not what you think they should be saying. Listening is very, very key. It's a skill that must be deployed in the board evaluation process. Ensure that all interviews and reports are handled tactfully, they are handled diplomatically, they are accurate, and they're timely. So you don't have an appointment with the director for his interview that's supposed to start at 12:05 and you arrive there at 12:05. If you arrive at 12:05, you are late because the interview is supposed to start at 12:05. And you need to set up your computer, you need to set up you even need to greet him and all that. It's better that you are there at least 10 minutes before, such that by 12:05, you are both set, all other things being equal, you are both settling in to actually commence the interviews. Our directors are very peculiar people. There are people who have achieved, there are people who have attained. They have a high thinking, if you like, of themselves and a high expectation from others. It's very easy for them to find fault. Don't give the opportunity for your evaluation to be discredited because of something that is not even important at all. So the scope of evaluation, the who, the what, to evaluate, we talk about the people. So it involves people. I'm talking about people. You are looking at the composition of the board. You're looking at the diversity of the board. You're looking at diversity, of course, in terms of gender, diversity in terms of geography, diversity in terms of age, okay, diversity in terms of skills, diversity in terms. So if you have a boardroom made up of 5 non-executive directors and 2 executive directors, and all 5 non-executive directors are lawyers, you don't have a diverse board. If 3 are lawyers and 2 are doctors, you still don't have a diverse board. You need a diverse board in terms of different kinds of skills. You may choose to have more than one of a particular area of specialization. One, if the board is made up of many people, so I have room to repeat skills. Secondly, if the board, if the company's area of business is in that field. So if you have like a pharmaceutical company or so, and you have 2 pharmacists or 1 pharmacist and 1 doctor, that may not be out of place, okay, and all that. But otherwise, look at the number of the board and look at the composition. These are some of the things that you assess as a board evaluator in terms of composition and diversity. Of course, the chairman is also the who to be assessed, but beyond being a who to be assessed, his role is a what to be assessed. Board members, including the independent directors have specific roles they are to play. Non-executive directors have specific roles they are to play. You yourself as a board evaluator, you must know what those roles are. I remember being involved in a board evaluation, incidentally, and evaluating this board. The board was a multinational board, as a matter of fact, with huge quality in terms of the composition of the body, individual experiences of board members. Something that struck us was that when we were asking some of the board members how many, during the one-on-one interviews, how many independent non-executive directors does this board have? Does the board have any independent non-executive directors? And if so, how many are they? And then a few of them said, I remember an instance in which somebody who the company had earmarked as an independent non-executive director. And the person said, he didn't think the board had any INET, and also wanted to know, in any case, what does an INET even do? Why is it necessary to have INET? And this was somebody who, in the board records, the company secretary's records, which we had checked, the person had been marked as an INET. Okay, maybe the person qualified to be an INET in terms of not being, maybe someone may qualify in terms of being an INET for the various parameters. You know, the code and various other documents have definitions for INET, and it's possible for a company to choose that, oh, this person meets the definition, let's make him our INET, or let's make her our INET. But it's not enough to make someone an INET. The person must know that he is an INET and know what it means to be an INET, and then make sure that he or she is playing that role. Having an independent non-executive director should not be a checkbox activity. It should be something that is done with the intention of achieving specific results. Quickly go to the board committees, the committee chairs, and the members of the committees. Of course, this also must be some of the people that you evaluate. And when you are evaluating the committee, the same point is the committee's charter, and of course the committee's terms of reference. Sometimes the terms of reference is incorporated into the charter, but the key thing is that you must know what that committee is about. And then when you look at the minutes of the committee, you'll be able to tell whether the committee knows what it is about, whether the members, the chair, are actually working in a way that shows that they are trying to achieve the purpose for which the committee was set up. Then we also look at practices. Some of the what we look at are practices. We've talked about structure, but the board structure and its processes, its operations, and all that. So, how is the board structured? Does the board even have committees? And if it does have committees, what committees does the board have? What the committees that work for a particular board or a particular company will be different from the committees that work for another company. So if you look at the financial services sector, for example, you will find that even before the code started prescribing that there should be enterprise risk management committees or risk management committees, that financial services sector banks were already having risk committees beyond their credit risk committee, because they recognize that risk was a huge issue and it was an enterprise risk beyond credit risk. So we're talking about operational risk, we're talking about legal risk, we're talking about other forms of risks that the organization could suffer. So depending on what kind of organization it is, you need to look at what committees do they have. There are some committees that can easily be merged, okay, and the company will still run well, the board will still run well. So if a board is smaller in terms of number of board members, they may not want to have 6 committees, okay, but at the same time, they need to have committees that address certain aspects. So do the charters, do the terms of reference address those things? So those are structural issues. Then how strategic is the board? Does the board take charge of strategy? How much of its time, even in the minutes, from the minutes or from other conversations, does the board dedicate to strategic issues of strategy? Okay, issues of direction. Does the board monitor how the management is performing in these areas? And of course, governance and organizational. What's the governance like? And all that. Is it just, are we paying lip service to governance? These are all areas of the what to evaluate in a board evaluation. And the scope, this particular slide is actually giving a bit more detail in terms of all we've been discussing. So we'll talk about director performance, individual director, lead director. Like if you have a director in that role, in the UK, we know we have a lead director, usually an INET, or who is different from the chairman, but kind of acts as a sounding board for the chairman, if you like. Then each committee, the chairs of the committees, and so on. Some of the things we've been discussing all along. So if board effectiveness assessment. So to determine the board effectiveness assessment, there are probably 3 areas that will come together into the overall board effectiveness. So we'll talk about the composition, and I know I've talked extensively about the composition. I've talked about the individual attributes of the directors. I've talked about their skills. I've talked about diversity. I've talked about the refresh mechanism in the succession planning, changing of board. But does the board actually have a deliberate approach to this? For example, do we say, okay, when a director gets to 70 years, he needs to step down? Or do we say when a director has been on the board for 10 years, he needs to step down? These are all refresh mechanisms, but it's good to have also the way that you bring in new blood onto the system. And these things are things that can be in the policies of the organization. What about the board practices? Risk appetite, I've spoken to that. The board engagement and strategy, I've spoken to that. Oversight over the CEO and succession, I've also spoken to that. These are board practices that can be brought in to help assess the board's effectiveness. And the working dynamics, quality of discussion, very, very important. Do people express their views? And I believe we have spoken to this. The board and management relationship, how does the board relate? Do board members even know any other person beyond the CEO? If the CEO is the only board member in the management, or beyond the executive directors, if there are other executive directors. In fact, that's one of the responsibilities of the INET, to know the top management people in respect who are responsible for some of the reports that come to the board, and be able to engage them and verify some of the information that the board gets. Okay. And what is the board culture in this regard? Then the who to evaluate. I think we've spoken to the who. I've talked about the individual directors. I've talked about the non-executive directors. I've talked about the executive directors. I've talked about the INETs, talked about the chairman, and of course the committee chairs and members of the committees, all being evaluated in their respective. So you're evaluating individual directors in their capacity as individual directors, because every director is a director. It doesn't matter what hats they are wearing. There are certain things that are expected of all directors: objectivity, independence, and so on and so forth. The contribution, these are all things expected of every director. Then there are things expected of executive directors. So you also evaluate them in that context. There are things expected of the CEO. You evaluate the CEO in that context, on being on the board. There are things expected of the INETs. You evaluate the INETs in that context. There are things expected of the NEDs. Evaluate them in that context. Things expected of the chairman. Evaluate the chairman in that context. There are things expected of the chairs of committees. What is expected of the chair of the governance committee is different from what is expected of the chair of the audit committee, or the chair of the risk committee, or the chair of any other committee. You evaluate them in the context of their responsibilities. And of course, the members of the respective committee are all to be evaluated within the context of what they are to do. Then, what to evaluate, of course, are core principles of effectiveness. And this is, again, all that we've been discussing, but looking at them again from a different perspective. For example, I know we've spoken to the board's evaluation culture, and I've given you some examples, okay? But now I'm talking about quality, the quality of the chair's leadership. So it's not just about evaluating the chairman, but also evaluating the quality of his leadership. How well does he lead? And some people would say, and I remember listening to Dr. Nosike once, where he was talking about the round robin rule. So if when you get to the board meeting, some directors, they don't say anything. They're quiet throughout the meeting. Okay? But a good chairman can ensure that every director contributes to the meeting. So by the way he leads, the directors will always come prepared to the meeting, because they know that the chairman is not going to allow them to sit quietly in the meetings all day, just listening to what others are saying. So that makes them to sit up, especially because they don't even know which area that the chairman might necessarily ask them to contribute to. So you find a situation where the chairman is calling director A to comment on a particular thing. He takes note of the director's comment, then asks B, who's sitting next to A, to speak next. By the time he finishes with B, who is sitting next to A, and goes to C, who is sitting next to B, the person who is sitting in the position of D knows he's coming to him next. So he's prepares his mind that he's going to have to make a contribution. So all these things speak to the quality of the chair's leadership. A good chairman brings out the best in other members of the board. A good chairman, like a judge, you know, in law, we used to say that a talking judge is not a good judge. A talking chairman is also not a good chairman. A good chairman allows everyone to talk and, as it were, rounds up or summarizes what was said. He may add his own view if he likes. Of course, he's at liberty to contribute, but he doesn't try to make his view to override the general view that has been expressed by others. Okay, so then the character, behaviors, and diversity of directors, I've spoken to those. Strength and quality of the partnerships between the executives and non-executives, I've also spoken to those. Best-in-class processes and dynamics, and the board working together as a team, as a high-performing team. I've spoken to that, talking about the fact that we are conscious that we all have a common goal. But you can see at the bottom of all that is an effective and influential company secretary. So if I'm appraising a board, evaluating a board, I will also be looking at the contributions of the board secretary, the company secretary, to how the board works together as a team and how the board is effective in terms of what it does for the organization. Now, this breaks down all that we've been saying in different areas and helps you have a good snapshot of what you need to evaluate as a good evaluator. Overall, it achieves board behavioral dynamics, but it also achieves board effectiveness. So there are various angles to it: the keyboard functions, the board governance roles, the board's effectiveness, and improving the board's processes. And then you have all the things that contribute towards that. For example, the board's effective, improving the board processes. You see things like the board meetings, how well the board meetings are structured, board meeting agenda, board papers, board minutes, board calendar, board committees. So a lot of this are in the folder, if you like, of the board secretary, because the board secretary is the one that works with the chair to create the agenda for the board meeting, and of course the CEO as well is involved in that. The board papers are circulated by the board secretary. If the board papers are circulated an hour before the board meeting, clearly the board meeting is not going to be a successful board meeting. And ideally, the board should have set its rules, had a process or its policy stating that it will not consider anything that comes within certain timelines. Then the board minutes are also prepared by the same secretary. The board calendar is prepared by the same secretary. The board committees are supported by the same board secretary. So you can see that in that process section, there's a lot of work for the board secretary there. Then the key, board function side, you see strategy, CEO, monitoring, compliance, risk management, policy framework, networking, stakeholder communication, and decision making. Okay, so these are also areas that this has a mix of people working on them. Strategy is a baby of the board, but the board does not actually prepare the draft strategy document. It's the CEO that drives that with his team. He may have a strategy department or whatever, depending on how big the organization is. But the bottom line is that this is brought to the board to approve. and so on and so forth. Then if you go to the governance side, the role of the board, the board structure, role of individual directors, role of the chair, role of the company secretary, and role of the CEO. These, for the most part, are the responsibility of the chair with the support of the company secretary. Okay, so in terms of the board's role and so on. So these are all areas that the governance evaluation, the board evaluation should cover. Okay, I've talked a lot about the board effectiveness side, which looks at evaluation, looks at selection of new directors, board induction, director induction, director development. But a key one that is there that we need to mention, or maybe two of them, and director protection and director remuneration. In terms of protection, usually there's an insurance policy which protects directors, but be mindful that that insurance policy does not protect it from illegal acts. It only protects in the course of doing what you're supposed to do. Remuneration, of course, is also there. Okay, so now to the approach and methodology. I mentioned the methodology before. How you have to determine early enough what approach and methodology you want to adopt. So you'll have documents and records review. Of course, if you're going to do an evaluation, you have to know where they are coming from. Review what they have already. Review, of course, share questionnaires for their input. Okay, so that it throws more light on your interpretation of the documents and records review. When we're talking about documents and records review, we're talking about things like minutes of meetings of the board, minutes of meetings of the board committees, board papers that were sent to the board. So when you look at those board papers and compare them to the minutes, it helps you to see how effective the board is really being. Because sometimes the board gets board papers and then the minutes doesn't reflect that there's proper consideration of what was presented to the board. Of course, interviews and engagements, there'll be interviews, one-on-one interviews, there'll be presentations in terms of groups of people. One-on-one interviews goes beyond just directors. You also talk to the top management or group heads or divisional heads. Different organizations have different nomenclature. Speak to key people. Sometimes you even speak to the auditors. Sometimes you speak to external parties, like if they have a lawyer and that's on the retainer, and so on. Then you also have the peer review documents. Again, the questionnaires, there are 2 questionnaires that we recommend. It could be 3, 4, or 5, but if there are too many questionnaires, the board member may get tired of filling a lot of forms. So what happens is that we generally try to design the questionnaires such that one of the questionnaires has different sections so that they can see it as one questionnaire, but whereas it's actually addressing, for example, addressing the board as a whole, it's addressing the committees, it's addressing individual directors without dealing with them as individuals per se. But the peer review questionnaire, which is the other questionnaire, deals with the directors as individuals per se, showing in more greater detail an individual's assessment of another individual. And in fact, the individual's assessment of himself as well, because it's also important to have self-assessment. And so if a director assesses himself that his punctuality is very high, and then the chairman and other directors assess him as always late at board meetings, then there's something happening there. Okay, so it also helps you in your analysis, of course. Yeah, and then talking about the analysis, of course, you have to know what is best practice in terms of what should be in place in order to compare, have a basis for comparing the outcomes you are seeing with the best practice or the leading practice. So that involves some research. So you have to make some research. All these things will now come into the reporting and presentation. So there has to be a report presented to the board as a whole, especially the report of the main evaluation. That has to go to the board. Then there's a feedback support process as well. So if board members need clarification in the process of answering their questionnaires or something, people sometimes are confused. They want to understand how to answer a particular question or something. That feedback process should be in place, either by email or even a phone number that they can reach to get help where they need it. Then the tools you deploy are very important. One of the things, the first tools is what we call a document list. If you're going to have an effective board evaluation, you must have a document list that you send to the client first to give you tell them what and what you will need for that we look into. So send them a comprehensive list, but that list is not usually the last of the list. As you go through the documents, review, and so on, other things come up that you also want to look at. So you give them updated lists from time to time if the need arises. Then I've talked about the questionnaires. There may be other forms that you choose to deploy for them to fill. But like I said, try as much as possible not to make them too many. Otherwise, you will lose the director's interest. And then there's interview schedule or guide. You work with the board secretary or company secretary to get a schedule and calendar, if you like, of which director will be interviewed at a particular date and where that interview will take place. So you have a proper schedule and you keep to it strictly and don't be late. The evaluation software, the software is now being used for some of these things. For example, we normally deploy software for the questionnaires. I've had the opportunity of doing a questionnaire that was physical in terms of giving the directors forms to actually print out and or printing out the forms and giving them to fill out, because some of them wanted the physical. It was very stressful and when it came to analyzing the feedback. But in terms of this evaluation software, many of them actually help you with analyzing the feedback. So it makes your job a lot easier as a consultant or as a board evaluator to do the various reports, analyze the outcomes, and be able to arrive at reports that you can present to the board. And this speaks again to this board skills matrix. You also have a matrix that shows what are the skills that are on the board and all that. So the questions you set in the questionnaire can bring this out, or you can have a simple form that just speaks to that. Or again, you can get that from the board secretary. You can get information and you feed it out in the matrix yourself in terms of what are the skills on the board. So the profiles of the individual directors could be useful in achieving this. So that helps you to know whether you have your diversity on the board or not, and you're able to speak to that. Now, let me say something about the peer review. The peer review is actually the directors assessing themselves and their peers, like I mentioned earlier. And what we usually do is to analyze their outcomes. We do not form any opinion. Directors are very sensitive about the peer review outcomes. I've noticed that. I remember in one instance where Dr. Losike and I worked together, it was even for public sector institution, that a particular director had a very high view of himself in terms of what he thought was his own rating, and a very low view of other directors' ratings. And when we were having the subsequent meetings with them, usually at the end of the peer review, the chairman is the one that, depending on the organization, sometimes it's the chairman that reviews the outcomes with the individual directors, and oftentimes the chairman would invite us to, as consultants that did the work, to come and support that process. So, and we had such an experience, and this particular director was very angry. He just could not understand the scores, the scoring that he got in terms, and he was sure there were mistakes. Thankfully, we had our documents. We were able to help the chairman to show him that this is actually how your colleagues appraised you, and of course we're not going to tell you what each individual person scored you in a particular place, because we don't want to create dissension on the board, or and people quarreling amongst themselves on the board. But it was not funny at all. But incidentally, he too had scored others very low, and for some reason he thought they wouldn't have scored him low. But it's not a one-off. There have been several, but that one was very dramatic, actually. That's why. But there was, I mean, most of the time when we have this peer review, directors don't like the outcomes. But it's actually supposed to be an opportunity for directors to improve their performance. This is one of the reasons why it's important to have the pre-board evaluation engagements with directors. I tell them what to expect already, so that it wouldn't be so forceful, the aggressive outcomes at the end of the process. And one of the tools we also use for this evaluation questionnaire is SurveyMonkey, and we use SurveyMonkey. Sometimes we also use Google as well. Google has a software that also is very user friendly, so on. So a lot of tools. In fact, some organizations have tools out there in the market, and one can purchase or subscribe to and use for some of these work. So rating. So in terms of the rating, you determine what kind of rating you are going to do. But the key, and remember, communicate is quite important. Otherwise, directors may actually be wanting to say somebody did very well, and whereas 5 is the highest score and 1 is the lowest score, they may score the person 1 because they think 1 represents first. Excuse me. So it's very important that there's proper communication at the beginning, and to make sure that those kind of errors are not made, because it can skew the results badly and make results not to look good, or not to represent the actual intended outcomes. I mentioned about technology tools. Customize your tool to meet the particular assignment, and that's what we normally do. We put the questions we want to ask in the tools, we deploy it the way we want to deploy it, and then you must deploy it consistently across. So you don't ask some directors 5 questions and ask other directors 3 questions. You have to make sure it's the same questionnaire that you are applying, so that the results can be compared. You're comparing like with like. Then determine your preferred rating or scoring parameters. I've already mentioned that there's no hard and fast rule. Some people use 5, some use 7, some even use 3, some even use 4. Okay. I personally prefer odd numbers, because it gives you the room to have that if somebody is doing very well, for the person to stand out clearly, and if somebody is not, for them not to. But to be honest, there's no hard and fast rule in terms of, but just know what you're doing, what results you want to get, why you are deploying it the way you're deploying it, and go for it. Then clearly, like that's what I just mentioned, define the chosen rating and scoring parameters, and don't forget to communicate it. Then ensure seamless application across board. So you have something like this. This is a kind of rating and scoring tool. So let's say you can say strongly agree, disagree, and strongly disagree. This is a 4 rating scale, but it could have had in between neither agree nor disagree. Between agree and disagree could be neither agree nor disagree. That would have made it 5. Then before you now have disagree, and you now have strongly disagree. So it's up to you. And then of course it cannot actually be you can also define it further to say that strongly disagree represents 4 points or represents 5 points. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Strongly agree represents 5 points. Strongly agree represents 3 points. And disagree represents 2 points. And strong disagree represents 1 point. But to be honest, if I was using some, or you can put, if you're doing 5, you can do 5, 4, 2. In fact, you can actually do 5, 4, 2, and 0 or something. But the point is, whatever you choose, just make sure that it is consistently deployed. Okay, so reporting and the next steps. Now, the key purpose of board evaluation is for people to be able to take action based on the evaluation results. So you have to send a report back. The reports, usually, oftentimes there are 2 reports, because we've talked about the board evaluation, we've talked about the peer review. So if you're doing both, then there will clearly be 2 reports. Now they are handled differently. The board evaluation report is presented to the board as a whole, communicate and discussed with the board. The board members will be asking questions and all that. You do that, and then usually would have an executive summary. Okay, that brings out the highlights, that brings out the short-term quick wins, things that they can quickly do and get some quick wins, the medium-term actions they need to take, and the long-term actions they need to take over a longer period, maybe like 2 to 5 years period. Okay, so it's communicated to the board. The board can take a decision. The board can even ask. Some of the things may need the help, your help as a consultant, or the help of other consultants, and they can ask you for whether you'll be willing to support the process, or whether you'll be able to recommend consultants that can assist in the process and all that. That shows the board that is eager to start action, where they've agreed with some of the consultants' recommendations. There are, the peer review report, on the other hand, is communicated confidentially. So the report itself is sent to the individual directors. Nobody actually sees everybody's report, except perhaps the board chairman. So the board chairman is first among equals. He's been trusted by board members to lead the board. So he's usually the person that we entrust such a report to. But again, we found that in practice, sometimes the board chairman is so busy, he will not have the time to read the report. Sometimes also some boards assign that specific responsibility in terms of their board evaluation, who should handle that process, to the chair of the governance committee. So depending on what operates in the particular circumstance, you work with them in terms of how you're going to do it, and you must communicate and agree with them upfront who and what is going to do what, so that you don't get into trouble. Because if a director finds that he didn't do well, then now finds that it is a particular director he doesn't agree with, that has information about how poorly he did, he may take it personally. So one has to be very careful in terms of how the reporting of the results is done. Then There's also what we call the post-peer review engagements with individual directors. That's the one I mentioned earlier about how it's usually done by the chairman, but oftentimes the chairman invites the consultant. And in my experience, and Dr. Nosiki and I have been involved together a number of times, and the chair would invite us to come and be party or to work with him or with her, as the case may be, in those engagements, because the chairman feels more confident that if a director raises questions, the consultants who did the work are there to answer. So we also make services available for that, and I recommend that every board evaluator should get very comfortable and confident about the work they do, to the point that they are willing and they are ready and they're able to stand and respond on any of the issues that they need to respond on. Then the reports should also recommend appropriate training. In fact, the code speaks to the issue of training. Some of the outcomes of a board evaluation should be training for the board as a whole in the areas that have been identified as being areas of shortcoming that the board has as a collective. But in addition, there's also supposed to be training for individual directors whose performance is found unsatisfactory in respect of any particular area. So the report should also ideally identify trainings for these directors. But I can tell you another thing that has also been my experience in terms of this issue of training. So we have engaged with directors, we have done the peer review. The peer review has confirmed in respect of a particular director some of the things you also found in the main report. And you have identified the training that is best suited to help address the particular shortcomings of the particular director. The company has agreed, of course, the training is at the company's expense. The board secretary has engaged the faculty, schools, sometimes even schools abroad, for the training of their directors, and then communicates to the director that so training is coming up, so dates, in line with what was the outcome of the board evaluation. Could you please confirm which date is your preference, so we can go ahead and book the training for you? Of course, it will be at the company's expense. And the director says, oh, really? Okay, please, can you send me the school's calendar? The secretary sends the calendar to the director. And guess what? Oh, because the director is a professional risk management, he's a risk management professional, or he's a banking professional, or he's a lawyer, or he's whatever. Guess what? He leaves the areas of shortcomings that have been identified, in respect of which the company wants to sponsor training to enhance the performance on the board of the company, and chooses something that's related to his own personal business that he's doing elsewhere, and wants the company to pay for that training. We have gotten feedback. I have gotten feedback from company secretaries on this so many times, of board members who want to do training in the area of their comfort zone. Meanwhile, the comfort zone is already an area where they are experts, they know their left from their right. It's not really directly related to the work they are doing for the company in the company's board. And the board wants to enhance their knowledge in areas where they are not such great experts. But now behold, they choose to go to Harvard to go and study something else because they want to meet their fellow professionals in their field. That is one of the areas that discourages organizations from sponsoring the training of their directors. Okay, so some of these things are things that we as consultants, as board evaluators, can also help by bringing them to the fore maybe at the point of making the presentation to the board on the report of the board evaluation itself, or at some point, so that we can minimize, not that it will be totally eradicated, but at least we can minimize the tendency for directors to do that. So recommend appropriate trainings that would address the identified gaps where performance is unsatisfactory. And then finally, the board evaluation results must be considered, or should be considered, in the director's re-election process. The code says that is one of the things to be considered in the re-election process. So if directors understand that it is something that is going to be considered in their re-election process, they probably take it a lot more seriously. But it's important to set the tone for all this right at the beginning, so that directors know just how seriously to take the process, because they shortchange themselves when they don't do that. So these are the actions to be taken. This is the reporting. And of course, in the reporting, as I mentioned, you step very key next steps are the short-term wins, the low-hanging fruits, what we call the low-hanging fruits. What can immediately be done by the company to bring about some improvement, even in terms of the way they have performed? What can be done over the 3 to 6 to 9 months, 3 to 9 months, or 3 to 6 months, depending on whatever timelines the consultant chooses to put. Period, what can be done in the 1 year and post 1 year period, and what can be done more long term. When that same consultant or another consultant comes back the following year, or any other, even in 3 years' time, to assess or to evaluate the board, picking up that report that said A, B, C, and D are the quick wins, E, F, G, H, D are the medium-term wins, and Y to Z are the long-term wins. Just picking them up and assessing where the company is with them, and how far they've gone, and what was achieved, is an indication as to the board evaluation culture in that organization, whether the board takes board evaluation seriously, or is just trying to check the box. Oh, we've conducted board evaluation using an external consultant. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's where my presentation will stop for now, and I look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Mr. Ojiji.
Yes, thank you, Doctor, for your presentation. It's very, very rich, very, very insightful, and very, very revealing. We appreciate you for this. I know our participants have also gained tremendously. So, dear participants, please, do we have questions? Okay, let's go to the chat box quickly. There's a question for Doctor. What practical tips can you share in managing peer review reporting, as well as peer influence in answering questions, in answering the questionnaire rather? That's a question from one of the participants.
That's an excellent question. An excellent question. These are real life issues. Okay? But I can tell you one thing. In terms of peer review influence, we have seen instances in which a particular director was trying to do things, answer questions in a way that would favor other directors. And at the end of the day, his own assessment by the same directors he was giving high scores to was poor. The assessment they gave him was poor. So he ended up looking very bad, whereas he was trying to make others look good. So one of the practical tips I would give is to actually bring this kind of experiences to the fore during the discussions that I mentioned with the directors before the process starts, to tell them that it is best you are objective. Do not try to make somebody look good, because at the end of the day, you may look like the worst director, because other directors may not necessarily try to make you look good. Okay, and but essentially to encourage directors to be very objective, to insist that objectivity is the essence of the success of this whole exercise, is really the thing. But at the end of the day, human beings will be human beings. You're not going to, you can take a horse to the stream, but you're not going to force them to drink, are you?
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Someone is asking if there's a scale of fees for board evaluation, and then a follow-up question is asking if you can throw more light on partial and full evaluation. First, if there's a scale of fees, then secondly, if you can throw more light on partial and full evaluation.
Okay, for fees, the fee would depend to a large extent on the amount of work to be done. So you find that for a board that is made up of 5 directors, you're talking about questionnaire deployed. They're going to analyze questionnaires involving 5 directors. You're going to have interviews with 5 directors. So everything is going to be structured around the size of the board. If, for example, the board was made up of 15 directors, clearly the amount of work would be tripled, if you like, although it doesn't always work out like that. But again, having said that, you need to also put into consideration the size of the company. What they can actually afford. Affordability is a key factor in terms of determining fees. So you look at, so I would say that there isn't really a scale of, again, different consultants charge differently. I was in the banking sector. I used to engage some of the consultants that were from the audit firms, the top audit firms. Their fees were quite high. I'm talking about like double-digit millions in terms of their fees. Occasionally, if we were able to negotiate down to a 9 million, 8 million, we were very happy. Okay, but in terms of governance practitioners like ICSAN, like the IOD, IOD when I was the IOD Center for Corporate Governance when I was there, like my firm Health Values and so on and so forth, we tend to charge a lot less because we are kind of more focused on the value addition to support the companies and all that. So you will find like a 5 million, a 3.5 to 5 million range being acceptable, depending, of course, on the size of the company. In fact, I've even seen some people charging as little as 2.5. But to be honest with you, the work involved is extensive. It is a lot of work. So it's important that at least you try to cover your costs in terms of the fee. I know that I've heard of somebody asking people to accept 800,000 naira for a board evaluation mandate. I don't know whether they just want a checkbox type of mandate, but if they want a full-blown, the kind of full board evaluation description that we've had, then they really may not be fair to the consultant who will be handling that and all that. So, well, unlike law, there's no scale of fees. So a lot depends on your ability to negotiate and on the ability of the counterparty to pay. to that extent. Then in terms of full and partial, yes, partial could be just looking at the peer review. You can actually take just the peer review evaluation and do that. Or you can do a purely document review evaluation, which does not involve interviews, may not involve questionnaires, and so on. That can be a partial evaluation. The point of it is that it all depends on what scope you agree with your clients upfront that you're going to do. I personally think that board evaluation is an annual exercise. It's done once a year, and it is what is worth doing well. So I recommend doing a full board evaluation if as an external consultant you're doing it. If it's something that you're doing as an internal person, it's not even practical. It's not even possible to do a full board evaluation. If, for instance, you're a company secretary who happens to have been certified now by ICSAN and you want to do the board evaluation for your organization, truth be told, you may not be able to do a full board evaluation because the level of acceptability that the board would give to that evaluation may not be the same level as it would give to an external faculty. So you may be better advised to look at a partial evaluation that would achieve the results. And one of the safest things to do would probably be a peer evaluation. Let the directors be the ones assessing themselves. Then your own is just to collect the results and give it to them. This is what you people said amongst yourselves. But that again brings the danger of scratch my back, I scratch your back. Give me 5, I give you 5, or something like that. Although I don't think the directors will actually speak to one another and say, okay, if you give me 5 across, assuming 5 was the scaling used, I will also give you 5. I don't think they would actually do that if we've had a proper conversation with them, explain to them the importance of the exercise. And it is not to make anyone look bad, but to identify the areas where the organization is going to send them for training, where the organization is going to help them to improve, and so on and so forth. So I hope that question has been answered.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Someone is asking how practicable it is to carry out this corporate governance evaluation on government-owned companies.
It's very practical. I did not mute my. Am I still muted? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, ma'am.
Okay. Yes, it is very practical. I have done that. I have done that for a number of government-owned entities. Some of them have boards, just like any other body. Just what makes them different is the way they are set up. So you have some of them that are set up by a separate act or something. So you just follow the law and the objectives, because evaluation is assessing whether somebody is meeting the objectives for which they were set up. So it's just that instead of checking some other parameters, you'll be checking the specific act that brought them into being. And so in terms of karma, some of them, it may not be so much karma, it may be more of a particular act. So you look at that act, or it may be a combination of both karma and that act, and so on. So we have done it. Both Dr. Nosiki and I, we've done this for a number of government-owned entities. And I can tell you one thing. I have seen a few of them, maybe 2, 3, literally transform. In fact, we've done corporate governance framework development for them, and then seen them transform their processes, put in place proper committees and so on, just as we recommended, and then start to make those things work. And they also saw the result in terms of the governance and the sustainability of and that encouraged them to do even more.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Someone is asking if it is good practice or ethical for the same practitioner that conducted the evaluation to conduct board effectiveness training.
Of course, there's nothing wrong with. In fact, as a matter of fact, I think it would even add value a lot, because the person would have a lot of information in terms of what the specific needs of that board would then be, given that they've been involved in the board in the evaluation and seen the, otherwise if it was somebody else, the company secretary will probably need to tell them some of the areas that the board is looking to address. But if that person has been involved, they will already know, so they'll be able to address those points. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. It's training. There's nothing, unless the person doesn't have the competence, because the issue about training should really speak more to the competence to deliver that training and to deliver the value that is required from that training, rather than the sentiment of wanting my own person there. But if that person is competent and already has this other information, I think that person should be able to add value.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Someone is asking if it's good practice to present the board evaluation report to the governance committee instead of the full board. And then in addition, can the board evaluation consultant discuss the peer review report one-on-one with the directors?
Okay, so in terms of presenting the report to the governance committee, I would not recommend it. The reason is that the governance committee members are also members of the board. It gives a group of directors the pre-knowledge of what is coming to the board, and they may want to influence it, So to make it more independent, I would rather present it to the board at once, everybody together, in terms of the report, the final report. Then in terms of the second question, which about the peer review,
yes.
the review with directors one-on-one.
One-on-one, yes.
It depends on what the board wants. If the board feels that it will feel more, because we've also seen that happen, where directors feel more comfortable with the consultants engaging with them one-on-one, rather than the chairman or the governance committee chair engaging with them. Whatever the board wants, at the end of the day, there's no hard and fast rule in these things. It's what the board directs. So if the board says the consultants should handle that, the consultants can handle that. However, what I think, in my experience, is more profitable is for the board chair to be at that meeting. So in fact, let me be honest with you, yes, it's the board chairman that's having this one-on-one discussion with the directors, but it is actually the consultants. I was the one that was actually presenting this report and drawing the attention of the directors to the areas that needed improvements, the areas where they were said to have done very well, and so on and so forth. I was, because the chairman doesn't have that information, that's the truth. But the chairman's presence was very important, because it gave it that authority as the head of the board, overseeing that process, rather than it looking like a private conversation. But at the end of the day, it depends on what the board wants. So.
Okay, thank you very much, Doctor, for your presentation once again. On this note, we call it a day, but we will not leave without us taking our group photograph with our facilitator. So please, dear participants, we enjoin us to please enable our videos so that we can take the group photograph with our dear esteemed facilitator Dr. Nechi Ezeaku. So please, participants, let's enable our videos so that we can quickly take the group photograph. Thank you. We are taking the photograph now. It's been taken. Okay, thank you very much. We apologize to participants. We've overshot the time, but we'll try as much as possible to keep the program. Tomorrow we are not meeting because we already have a roundtable on corporate governance tomorrow. For those of us who are yet to register for the program, we encourage you to please do so because it's going to be another interesting program, and our dear facilitator, Dr. Nechi, happens to be a discussant at that event tomorrow. So please try and be part of it so that you won't miss the program. And on that note, we want to thank you for being part of this program, and we look forward to having you tomorrow for corporate governance, and finally on Friday for the last lap of this program. Thank you very much. It starts at 10 a.m. We look forward to having you. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.